And welcome back. It's been a long time since we've been here recording, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. If you're a fan of Indiana Jones and you were curious what we thought the best to worst Indiana Jones films are, this is your show. Dixon, how we doing?
Doing great. And I can't wait to talk about how much better the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is than all the rest of them.
That is, so hopefully that's roped you in to hear how on earth is he going to sell this. And what I will say is, I would imagine there's going to be some spoilers in this because we've both seen the latest installment of Indiana Jones.
We have.
And from my point of view, and I think you're being a bit tongue-in-cheek here, Dixon, but I think if we're giving any spoilers on Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls out, we're probably doing a service to those that have yet to see it and are considering to do so.
You're talking about the Dial of Destiny, Sean.
No, I'm not, as a matter of fact.
Wait. Kingdom of the Crystal, like who hasn't seen Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? That came out 15 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, if you're waiting to decide whether to see it now, I would say, it's kind of like in for a penny, in for a pound. Like if at this point you haven't seen it, then I don't know that you should just on, like now you're that person who never saw it.
I equate, and more so now than ever before, I equate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to the second to last Rocky film, to Rocky V. That was a film in my view. So that film. So actually, let me take a step back.
That's
here.
A set we should do too sometime. Although that would
100%.
force me. That would force me to see Rockies 2, 3, and 5, which I have never done.
Ooh, yeah. I think that's one we need to put on the list.
Oh,
now I have a thought. I have a thought here, just to get back to Indiana Jones really quick on how we can break this down, because I thought about it'd be weird just to go at it, because if, let's say, you and I started from the bottom, it would be difficult to sort of categorize this debate. And I just want to give you sort of a template that I think might work. I think this is a multi-phased approach. Okay. I think we have the old Indiana Jones universe and the new Indiana Jones universe, so to speak. What is the prime Indy and what is the older Indy in these sort of late
declining
fashionable what are fashionable remakes, or not this isn't a remake, this is actually a continuation. But I think the conversation has to first start with a comparative on Dial of Destiny and Crystal Skulls, because I feel like that's a qualifier to see if either of those fit into that pack. Now, you may have a view, and this is something that we need to decide, that something like, let's say, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, or Raiders are actually not in that top three. Now, if you if you agree that one of those isn't in the top three, then we can't go with that first premise of comparing the latter two. So how do you
Sean, I want to be clear here that this is going to sound like a hot take for the purposes of this video.
No, don't do this. If you just don't, I don't want clickbait. I want you to be authentic and genuine here.
Authentic. I had not watched The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull all the way through since I saw it in the theater in 2008 and walked out disgusted.
And I want to point out, I watched it again as well, 2 days ago.
Irritated, disgusted, and every other thing. So I watched it last night with my son. And Sean, I was very pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed the hell out of that movie. And in fact, I think I am willing to say that it
now,
is
wait,
better.
before can I okay. I don't want you to ruin the tapestry of this conversation. However, maybe we can discuss it in the realm of, in your opinion, should this be discussed in the same vein as Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I think we've discussed off air, is a, whether we think it's 1 or 3, is at the very least a top tier Indiana Jones. Is it in that conversation?
It is not in the Raiders of the Lost Ark conversation.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
But I'm going to light up the internet, Sean.
Holy shit.
I think it is a better film than Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Ooh, yeah, that is a hot take.
I think it is. Nope.
That is a hot take.
No, it is not, sir.
Yeah.
It is my considered opinion. After I watched both recently, and I said, you know what? The Last Crusade gets off to a rather rough start. And it does get better as it goes along. And And obviously, you're there for the interplay between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford as Dr. Jones and Dr. Jones Sr. And that is, that's what the whole movie is built around. Without that, I mean, and that's the problem with The Last Crusade. You take that out, and it's Raiders of the Lost Ark done almost like a comedy. And even with it, it's arguably comedic, right? Because a lot of the interactions between Indy and his father are meant to be funny. But, as you watch that film, obviously you have the return of Marcus Brody, as instead of in the first film, he's a dignified museum owner who obviously somehow has, perhaps because he's wealthy or something, you don't get quite the concept, but he must be he's well positioned and can help fund Indiana Jones's expeditions to wherever. Sure. And it's a small part, but it's a serious part. He is rendered into comedic relief in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade opens with this very, it's very by the numbers. I remember a review that I read once saying it, and really watching it almost literally in that scene in the church turned to library with the 1, the 10, 1, 1, 5, 5, 10, or whatever the three numbers are. 7, 1, 1, 7, 7, 10, 10. And you're looking at the stained glass window and at the floor, and the little stuff with X marks the spot. I mean, it just has this kind of light. I mean, there's nothing wrong with lighthearted. Don't get me wrong. It's a fun movie. I'm not, by the way, I want to say this very clearly. I would watch any of these movies again. I'm not saying that any of them are bad.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that The Last Crusade is more clearly derivative of the first film. And I think intentionally so. And we could talk about the Temple of Doom and why that was done. And I think, although there's some really fun stuff between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, those of us who are of a certain age, I think, tend to look at that film with a certain degree of rose-tinted glasses. And I think there was also a lot of hostility towards George Lucas coming out of the prequel films, which are also, I think, as I get older, I've decided there are problems, and the problems have been well documented. And what those problems are by the red letter media in particular, I think he gave the most focused criticism of those films. But in so doing, he both overplayed it, and I think he kind of almost like a cleansing. Like he got it all out, and okay, good. We know the acting sucks. There's an over-reliance on CGI at times, which leads to very flat and boring direction in terms of there's a lot of walking, stepping in the center of the shot and talking like that. But those movies we could talk about some other time. With respect to this, though, I think there was a lot of this hostility coming at George Lucas, and I'm prepared to defend Kingdom of the Crystal Skull on terms very similar to the ones I would defend the prequels on as we move this conversation forward. Sorry that took so long.
No, that's okay. I am a little bit surprised that you, on a second watching, rated Crystal Skulls. My second watching, so maybe we open with Crystal Skulls because I think we need to get over this hump.
Crystal Skull, Sean, just the one.
Is it Crystal Skull? Sorry, no, because it was plural skulls in the film. So maybe
you're right. Me. You're right. Yes, yes.
Was it Crystal? Hold on.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I have something for the audience here. I've made a little ranking chart. And I need to do this over here. So let's just see. We have Last Crusade. Don't worry, it's not going in any order, Dixon. So just relax. We have. I can't even read that actually.
That's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Oh wait, no, that's one. Indiana Jones.
Oh, it is Skull. Singular. You were right.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Yeah.
Yeah, you've won a point already. So I rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, and in doing so, it cemented my view that for me, it was the most disappointing Indiana Jones. I didn't hate it. And there's rose-tinted glasses for me with Indiana Jones, the character and the franchise. However, when I looked at that, I thought this is genetically, Harrison Ford is one of probably the most gifted actors in Hollywood with how physically fit he is in his mid to late 70s, going into his 80s for this film, for Dial of Destiny, the next one.
He was about
And
60, 65, 66 for
yes.
Kingdom of the Crystal Scroll, and 80 years old on the nose.
So
for Dial
Kingdom
of
of the
Destiny.
Crystal Skull, I would postulate that many people watching this would think he looked like he was in better shape and in better condition, and maybe even younger than me in that film. And you had a 100%. You had a serviceable action hero Indiana Jones in that film. You had somebody who was young enough. You had a actor in Shia LaBeouf, who I actually quite like him as an actor. I think he's a very good actor.
Yes, and
I liked
that
his
was another
addition to that
thing. I
cast.
thought, yeah, he didn't bother me at all this time.
No.
Whereas the first time, he really. Well, I remember being in the theater, being just irritated by his character and everything to do with him. And for whatever reason, this time, I guess maybe because I knew it was coming, but
Yeah,
nope.
It's to me, there was a bit of his character that was a bit overplayed, but same as you, I watched it the second time, and his character didn't bother. If anything, I thought he added to the whole spectrum. But what frustrated me was it just Crystal Skull, out of all of the films, seemed like the laziest effort at an Indiana Jones film. It seemed like everything was what you were talking about in Last Crusade. I feel like, as far as the X marks the spot piece, where everything was sort of condensed, into a very short window. I could justifiably explain that away, that he was picking up his dad's work, that was his life's work, and he was on the verge of discovering this. And Indiana Jones just picked up where he left off at the point of discovery. Whereas Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, it was just very much we're here. We run into these Russians played by Cate Blanchett, which I don't know that I thought her character added to the film. It was a distraction. Her Russian accent, that was Cate Blanchett, wasn't it?
Yes.
Her character was a bit. There was something in the film that just seemed like it was like they put a set together that was it. It didn't look like an authentic. It looked like they were trying to recreate an Indiana Jones set, but it just seemed like I can't put my finger on it when I was watching it. It seemed like everything was a bit canned and recreated from Raiders of the Lost Ark, even down to the scene where what's his name was auto writing, and you had that camp scene that was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they have the Nazis in the tents and they're outside of the place to go discover shit, and just everything seemed to be very contrived in that film. And I just felt like you have an incredible cast for Crystal Skulls. I really wish that it just seemed like there wasn't enough effort into making a quality Indiana Jones film, either from the action perspective, which I felt like it was a bit lazy, or even from the perspective of the storyline, which I don't like the fact that they went into more of a space sci-fi theme. And I appreciate that the religious elements of Raiders, of Temple of Doom, of Last Crusade, and even Dial of Destiny, there is sci-fi there, but it's got connective tissue to, let's say, science and history, whereas Crystal Skulls is more connected with the TV show Ancient Aliens. So for me, that was where I was frustrated, because the pieces were there, but the storyline, the scenery, the background, everything about it just seemed like we were just trying to quickly recreate Indiana Jones. And that's why I can't put it into that tier list. Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it to a degree. And I may even have a controversial take later in this on where I rank this amongst others. But that's my view on Crystal Skull.
Well, let me pick you up from there. So, first of all, I don't think, although there are certainly elements of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that are mirroring Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm thinking in particular of the truck chase sequence in the middle of the film as they're going through the jungle.
We're talking Raiders now.
Right. It's mirroring the Raiders truck chase sequence. Right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, both films have this extended truck chase sequence, which in Raiders, Raiders will always get the nod because it was in, not that they invented the idea of a car chase for that, but it was the first time it was done in that franchise. So,
yeah,
it came first, and it's honestly also better executed overall staging wise, right? It just is a much more tightly done and exciting chase, probably, than the one in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But we got to leave Raiders out of this.
Yeah,
because
and I want to say just on that before, just real quick, I watched all of them. except for I didn't go back to see Dial of Destiny. And that car chase scene in Raiders, that truck chase, whatever you want to call
It's
it,
astounding.
it's still excellent. It is an excellent car chase scene. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's tremendous. And we'll talk about Raiders separately. What I am going to say here is that what's very clear is that, to me, even as you were talking, and I don't know that I would have put it quite this way, but you're right. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a remake of The Last Crusade. I mean, all the same plot points are there. And the thing that you said at the beginning, I don't think is quite correct. As in The Last Crusade, where Indiana Jones is picking up the work of his father, in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he's picking up the work of this character that admittedly they invented for the film, Dr. Yeah, right. But I mean, it's the same concept, right? Someone shows up, tells him someone important to him has disappeared. And this time we're involving, this kid. And, and obviously you find out halfway through the film that the kid is his kid and it's Marion is his mother. But, it's the same idea that, like, okay, someone who means something to you has kind of vanished while completing his life's work on this stuff.
Yeah.
And then the story picks up from there. The reason why I would say that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a better film than The Last Crusade, even though I'm now basically conceding it is derivative, highly derivative of The Last Crusade, because the story points are almost beat for beat the same thing. I think back to what George Lucas said about the sequel films and why, after Disney bought Star Wars, why he objected to them and why I object to The Force Awakens and think it's a worse film than any of the prequel films. Is that he said, well, they wanted Disney, that is, wanted to do a nostalgia movie. And I don't want to do a nostalgia movie. I work very hard to make all of my films be obviously different from one another, and how to use different. And he was talking about the Star Wars franchise. Well, if you look at The Last Crusade, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a little bit like if they had done it at that time. It's like kind of going back and doing that film, but instead of just rehashing, taking the Raiders of the Ark of the Covenant and substituting a Christian artifact, the Holy Grail, in for it, and then otherwise bringing back the same set of the characters, similar looking scenes, the same villains, scenes as settings, deserts and ancient archaeology and all that kind of thing. We're going to do something very different. Just as the Temple of Doom, for what anybody else wants to say about it, is substantially a different film from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So for that reason, I would say, and it's really mostly on the strength of that reason, I would say that looking back at it too, things that bothered me the first time, and again, maybe it's just a question of like, now I know they're coming and so I'm less put off by them. But I remember thinking in the theater that Harrison Ford had lost something of the zip off his fastball, by the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. That I felt his line delivery was at times poor. I will say that the writing of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and there's a couple of scenes that jump out at me, but like right at the beginning of the film, here's a line that would not have been included in the 80s because writing in general has declined across films all over the place. And it has to do with explaining the joke. If you think about the way Indiana Jones, I'm trying to think of a good example, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay. He's going to fight the big Nazi, in that big set piece in the middle who's, no shirt on, bald head, mustache, looks like Sergeant Slaughter. And they get into the fist fight. And Indiana puts the Dukes up and the guy punches him right in the face. And then he like stunned for a second and then just falls on his butt. I mean, they're upending your audience expectation there. There's no line to explain like why that's funny. You just laugh at it. Yeah. Now take the opening of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So he takes his whip. He's chasing one of the trucks out of the warehouse, and he's trying to land in the back of the truck, and he swings for it, and he misses it. In classic Indy style. That's a classic Indy visual. There's nothing wrong with it. And he lands in the trailing truck. But then we have a shot of him saying, "Damn, I thought I thought it was closer, or something. Like he explains why he failed, which is not something that would have ever happened in the 80s films. So to the extent, there's a couple other moments like that in The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull where it's like, man, it just wouldn't have been, you would have relied on the audience's intelligence to understand what the joke was without inserting a line to explain what the joke was.
Yeah.
And there's a dumbing down that happens with that, with The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But even with that, I will say that, the notion of adding the alien piece and some of that sci-fi piece. I mean, obviously that was George Lucas's baby. He really wanted to do that, but I thought it was basically pretty well done. It fits within the Indiana Jones milieu, in terms of, it starts as an archaeological expedition and then it takes a surprising turn. But you know what? As an audience member in 2008 who was just turning 30, maybe 29, and I was at that age where nostalgia starts to cloud the brain.
Yeah.
I really, was offended by it. As a person who's now seen nostalgia take over the culture entirely, top to bottom, thinking back on it, it's like, you know what, that left turn actually is maybe the strength of the film. Is that, we're not going to just repeat the same thing over again, beat for beat. Like we've patterned it after The Last Crusade. We've given you your little nuggets. I mean, one of my favorite little, very subtle callbacks to and again, showing that it's a remake of The Last Crusade, not Raiders of the Lost Ark, with the motorcycle scene chase, which again, I thought was, although implausible, actually fairly effective through the town after you start the little fight in the soda shop or whatever.
Yeah.
Bar.
I enjoyed those scenes.
Yeah, and then when they get to the part where he finally loses them and they run into the statue of Marcus Brody and it knocks the head off, and there's a cut to Indiana Jones sitting on the back of the motorcycle that Mutt is driving, and Mutt kind of smiles and laughs and looks back at he doesn't know he's his father yet, and he's just got an absolutely flat expression, like, yeah, there's nothing funny about this. Well, that's a cute little callback to the scene, the turning the scene over in The Last Crusade as they've escaped the Nazis, and you get the same interaction, and it's really well done, and it's subtle, and they don't comment on it. That it's just left there as a nugget for the audience. Much better. So anyway, with all that said, this is why I think, and it's not that The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a perfect film or that it's by a wide margin, but I think there's something to be said for the originality of the thought that audiences in general, they like more of what they've already got. They like to know that what they're getting, this is a studied thing with audiences, but George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and these folks, they're creative people, and creative people, generally speaking, don't like to repeat themselves ad nauseum. Yeah. And The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull actually avoids that, which is something, I think that's something strong to be said for it.
I think there's a few things I want to pick up on that, because I don't think the film was poorly made, and whilst it's not, was it the way the ending was, I'm going to come back to the alien piece in a second, because it wasn't the fact that it was the aliens that necessarily bothered me, because there's a historical precedent with a conspiracy theory on these crystal skulls. I think there's crystal skulls somewhere that somebody's probably molded, but then somebody says, no way this could be done by humans at this time, whatever. Right. I think there's a few maybe contradictory points in your view here. And first, if we talk about the writing, and if we're comparing Last Crusade, I think Last Crusade is probably up there as a good standard of an Indiana Jones film for me. And I think if we talk about the writing, that whole storyline unloads from the sort of the Genesis story with him as a child, River Phoenix, those scenes, and I quite like those scenes. I actually, when I first watched that, I love this Genesis arc, this story of where Indiana Jones comes from. I remember actually it was one of the first books I read, reading this story, having this connection with this character, and I really enjoyed that. And I love this evolution with Sean Connery, his father, and learning how he got his name and how he got his personality, how he got the scar on his chin. All these things are addressed that when you haven't seen an Indiana Jones film in ages, and I don't know that Last Crusade, from my perspective, was expected. So there is, again, rose-tinted glasses. But I felt like the storyline was very well orchestrated and very well bled out from start to end. Whereas in the Crystal Skull, I felt like it was, they spent too much time wasted. So that whole first scene with the nuclear blast, whilst it was good cinema, I thought it was just not a good scene. There's so many things that bothered me about it. And what makes good sci-fi is you can look past the inaccuracies of what is and isn't possible. And I think Crystal Skull bothered me because I really struggled with the fact that he got into a lead line fridge and survived a nuclear explosion. And I thought, yeah, that's okay. I'll let that go. But then, that scene, that whole beginning component took what, 15% of the film's time?
Yeah, it's longer than I remembered. Right.
Now,
It was.
and it wasn't.
Although, you know what, though? The sequence at the beginning of The Last Crusade also goes on for quite a while. It's about 15 minutes long.
I enjoy, but the thing is, I enjoy that sequence, bringing in that whole story of his fear of snakes, and River Phoenix, excellent actor, in his day.
May he rest in peace.
May he rest in peace. But the Last Crusade, if we even compare its humor, that humor component, I would even say that Temple of Doom was even more sophomoric. Is that the right word? I don't know. Is it more?
Wow.
It
certainly had its sophomoric bits, like with the elephant and like her at the campsite and all the animals. I mean, and the bug thing. Yeah, sophomoric is a great word for like the gross out gags at the dinner.
Yeah, I would say that the comedy bit, the precedent was set by Temple of Doom. I think it was orchestrated so much better in Last Crusade with a higher caliber of actor. And I think Crystal Skull picked up that precedent that was set by Temple of Doom, not Last Crusade. So for me, the storyline, I think it, because you're losing 15% of the film, to introduce Ray Winston as a double or triple agent or whatever, it doesn't add that much to the beginning of that story, because we kind of learn what's going on when he meets his son. And in the beginning, it's almost like, well, this is a crazy coincidence. His son happens to show up at the same time he's kidnapped by the Nazis for the same skull. So, and I appreciate there is connective tissue with Oz, but that bothered me. And then when we get to the end of the film, when we talk about Last Crusade or Raiders of the Lost Ark, or those final scenes that don't impact, like, if they go home, most people don't know what's going on. Now, at the end of this film, by the Nazca lines, I think did I pronounce it right? Nazca?
I couldn't.
Somebody's going to correct me on this. But when they leave Peru,
that's engagement, Sean. That's engagement.
I'm trying to bring in the audience. But when we get to the end of that film, I just remember thinking, man, the geological change in that area is going to be, worldwide news. It is going to be, what the hell happened here? And the fingerprint this film leaves on what is the Indiana Jones universe afterwards. Like, it's nothing that's a big issue to me, but it bothers me. It feels like just a loose end that just sits there and festers and bothers me. And I just feel like, for all the work that went into this film, which to me, I'm sure there's a lot of work to make a good film, the storyline doesn't deliver. The humor doesn't bother me because I think that's a component of Indiana Jones, specifically from Temple of Doom.
No, I don't know that you could do Raiders of the Lost Ark again. And I think that, to the credit of the series producers, they recognize that.
Yeah.
And so they went, and I never thought about it before, and it is because it's such a strange mix, because Temple of Doom is at times so dark that it can be easy to forget that there's a lot in it that is sort of moving in the direction of The Last Crusade and doing comedy bits, in the film. Certainly from its opening, it's giving you that lighter tone, or implying a lighter tone. Whether it gets there or not is another question.
But I want to make my controversial statement, and it has to do with Temple of Doom, because I rewatched that last night. Yeah, I had to rewatch it twice because I was not losing interest. And if it's on TV again in a month, I'll watch it. That's kind of a rule. If you're an Indiana Jones fan, it's on TV, you watch it. There's no question.
Yeah.
You put it on. If you got nothing else going on, it's on in the background. And Temple of Doom, when we talk about those loose ends, and we talk about the storyline, and we talk about the humor has to be good to be pulled off. And I think Last Crusade, the humor is very good. It's very fitting with the film. And I don't think it takes away from the action of the storyline. I think in Temple of Doom, there's a lot of things that really troubled me. As a kid, I would say it was my favorite. As I'm getting older, I'm questioning which of the bottom three Temple of Doom sits in out of all of the Indiana Jones films. After I watched it a second time. Now, I want to stress, and I feel a bit guilty about this, because Indiana Jones is like family. I don't want to be trashing family.
Well,
Indy's
again,
part of the.
ranking it the fifth out of the Indiana Jones movies is still like, that's not, if you were to say that it's the fifth. We're talking about Indiana Jones movies, not Transformers movies, right?
No,
Right.
it's.
So Temple
I
of Doom
still
is
love
still
Temple of
orders of
Doom.
magnitude. Right. Exactly. That's my point.
I still love Temple of Doom, and I probably would never put it above Crystal Skull, no matter what, in my view, just to sort of push us forward in that direction. But
Wait, you
I'm
never put it
questioning whether
above
Temple of
Kingdom of
Doom
the Crystal Skull or behind? Oh, yeah, it
in
depends on how you're looking at
so
above.
so
Okay.
Crystal Skull for me. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised given the nature of this conversation. That is tail end for me. That
Yeah.
is back of the pack. That doesn't meet the standard, in my opinion. Now, I think you're going to have a different position on that.
You're correct.
But Temple of Doom for me, I didn't expect this when I watched it again. I question whether that's number 4 in my list when we come to, like, for me, unless you say something to change my mind, I don't see that making it. It's between that and Dial of Destiny. After I've seen that one,
Well, I will say that as time has gone on, Temple of Doom has increased rather than decreased in my estimation. Now, I'm going to preface that by saying
I'm not
Temple of Doom
surprised.
probably has the most problematic, from a modern audience's sensibilities.
Yeah,
Although you get quite a bit of it. Actually, I was surprised by how much of it there was with the native depiction of natives of like the Amazon in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, given that that was made in 2008. Certainly 1985's Temple of Doom. It wasn't even the film's banned in India for valid reason.
well, I just want to mention that because I didn't say this to my, in my brain, there was a thought going around that my brain was like, no, you're being silly. But it was almost like the way they were portraying these tribes, it was almost as if he went into like a special needs school. And it was like seeing people that were exceptional that he was here to help, and they were a bit weird, but Indiana Jones is here to help. And it was
Yeah,
like they
right.
weren't portraying them like they were just like you and I, but with a different culture. It was like there's this fucking weird culture that
Yep.
Indiana Jones is dropped in to save, and
Yeah, it's the
that was
white
something that
savior
played in my
narrative.
mind.
Oh
What's
yeah,
that?
it's the white savior narrative played out. There's no doubt, right? And it
Yeah,
is, it's an old narrative. It's a problematic narrative. So I recognize that that's an issue, and it's not. When I say it's a problematic narrative, too, the film does absolutely nothing to complicate it whatsoever, right? There's not any kind of sense that this is something that is maybe questionable. I mean, the film is based, and that's I think a lot of part of what's lost about the Temple of Doom to most modern audiences, but wouldn't necessarily have been lost to the adults who went to see it, maybe with their kids, and who came out complaining about some of the level of violence in 1985. Which is that, and if you ever check out like something like She Who Must Be Obeyed, which is, I believe, based on the novel by J. Ryder Haggard. Just checking myself on that. Yep. Or H. Rider. I said J. H. Rider Haggard, who also did The Lost World and John Carter of Mars, I believe. He's a well-established fantasy adventure novelist from the Victorian period about whom he did King Solomon's Mines, that's something we could talk about while we're talking Indiana Jones. If you've ever seen
never seen it.
They were made in the mid 80s as a like they were Indiana Jones knockoffs, starring Richard Chamberlain and a couple. Oh, they're interesting, but I mean they're
This
bad, but they're
this is
interesting.
where I miss out on not being the cinephile you were over the last 20 years. I liked
Well,
film,
yeah,
but
it's been a while. It's been a while
you're a
since I've
film
been to
buff.
80s, 90s, not so much now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and I guess I was wrong about John Carter of Mars. I thought that was him. But anyway, he's an adventure novel writer. And if you look at the film from the 30s based on She Who Must Be Obeyed, and like look at the setting and like the way that the set design was done on that and some of the big set piece action pieces, you could see the exact like inspiration for the Temple of Doom visuals, right?
Yeah.
And they just are lost on people, even kids who saw the film, because, you know, when you and I were kids, now I didn't see Temple of Doom till I was older. My parents certainly, I mean, I was only 7 when that movie came out. And, you know, that one has a reputation that it was the last, of course, of the 3 originals that I saw, because my parents were a little conservative about what kinds of films I might see. But anyway, the Temple of Doom, it just has a basis that even kids who saw it at the time have no idea about, which is also probably true to a certain degree of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the most clearly based on serial film stuff, like, you know, movie series. I had all that because my dad was into these types of things, so I knew that. And when you look at Temple of Doom, I mean, visually, again, I think the first thing is that the temptation when you're making a sequel is to make, you know, what do audiences want? More of the same. And to George Lucas and Steven Spielberg's eternal credit, they, first of all, this is the first, I believe, if it's not the first, it's certainly the first time I ever heard the word prequel attached to a film, because it is in fact set before Raiders of the Lost Ark, not after. And having been set before it, it's set in a completely different country with a completely different set of films. And, you know, George Lucas is always doing pastiche with this stuff. And it has it's informed by a completely different visual and film language. Starting with the music, the big musical number at the beginning, which is again out of 30s musicals and 40s musicals. Like, I've seen things that this would have been based on, including, I'm trying to remember what's her name. She swam across the English Channel famously, and then was in movies. All I can come up with is Elsa Lancaster at the minute, and that's not right. But it begins with an E. Anyway, she Esther Williams. The song, for audience members who may not know this, that's now a Christmas song, somehow got turned into a Christmas song. It was his own controversy. Baby, It's Cold Outside in this country a few years ago. That song actually debuted in one of her films as not a Christmas song. But anyway, Esther Williams was like a swimmer, and she did, like, you know, all it was done in the water. You know, these kinds of big set piece musical numbers were very 30s and set in nightclubs. And starting with that, they announced from the word go, and the tone of that whole scene, which is highly comedic, and, you know, it's much faster than in some ways Raiders of the Lost Ark, because you go right from that scene into the main plot. And even though it's one adventure to another, there's no time to stop. Like, you know, if you think about Raiders of the Lost Ark, you see the opening adventure, then we obviously go back to America, and he hands over the artifact, or doesn't hand over the artifact. He explains what happened, and you meet some characters, and then he gets the mission to go for, and there's some downtime and calm time. This is like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
One to the next, one to the next, one to the next. And it's just a different film, and it's a different film. Like, for using the same character, he's replaced all the characters around the main character, and it's a completely different set of film language. And I admire that. I admire that tremendously in a sequel, that it is not just a rehash of the material done previously. Now, you could make the argument, and when we get to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark, that it cheapens it, because it's both, because of that comedic stuff that gets done, maybe reduces the character and the stuff a little bit. And certainly there's, besides the problematic stuff with the way natives are depicted, all the child slavery stuff and the whipping of children that happens in that is very oh yeah, I mean, it's something. And, you know, obviously I think Lucas and Spielberg both say it's their least favorite of the films, that they were in bad moods when they made it, and they kind of don't have much nice to say about it. But I think there's a lot to recommend the Temple of Doom. And once again, as with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, some of it has to do with its originality. And of the three that I find to be the best, Raiders, that one, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it is maybe not the most original, but it's certainly, you know, it's firmly in second place, because without inventing the character, it otherwise completely redid everything, which is impressive.
I think for me, I agree. Of all the films, I think the set design in that film was the one that I think, even as a young person, captured my imagination more than anything, with the lava floor and you know, the scene that I was a bit torn on, that, you know, that scene where they're in the coal cars and they're in the chase in the coal car.
Yes,
which
exciting scene.
It's an exciting scene. However, you then, as you're watching it as a grown-up, and this is where, for me, this is how I define good sci-fi. If I start questioning the reality of this construct, then the sci-fi isn't quite done as well as I'd like it to, because I'm then starting to think, man, that's a really, really long trek. That's how did they build that track? How did they get that over the lava? Didn't the lava, wasn't that an issue? Like, getting the, they were working with kids, for Christ's sakes. How did they hammer that thing through? And
Well,
then,
they just incinerated any children who fell in. You get the next child. That's
I mean,
all.
it's, for cleanup, it's an incredible idea. Yeah, build over lava. Makes
Right.
sense. But then it, like the scene that, and it's funny how you don't think about these things and how modern audiences really start to pick these things apart, which modern day sci-fi making, I think, has got to be a hell of a lot harder than it was in the 80s. Because when they go over that gap in the tracks and they just catch the track again, it's like, man, that bothered me this time. I don't know why. It's something I knew was coming. I was prepared for it, but again, I couldn't get my brain off of that. And it was these little things, you then go back to the jump out of the parachute in the life preserver, the life raft, which good scene. I can give that one a pass, not a problem. But then why is Willie still here? Why is she not, she got to the palace. They clearly have a means to get her a plane to get home. Why is she still tagging along? And there's just so many things in it that watching it this week, it made me knock it down a peg. And those are the items. And that's putting aside this set design, the scene, this was an iconic movie for me as a child. And this is one, maybe even up until a couple of years ago, I would have said was my favorite. I don't think I can do that now.
Well, I don't know what to tell you, Sean. I mean, first of all, if you're expecting a whole lot of realism out of Indiana Jones, you've come to the wrong place.
No, that's a straw man, though. I didn't say that. I said, I think good sci-fi is when you're able to let those items pass. And when you start thinking about them, then you've not put a lot of thought into constructing it.
Right. Well, listen, I know what you mean, because what bothers me in modern films, and to a degree, although I have to give credit to all of the Indiana Jones films including Dial of Destiny, I don't think they gave into this too often. The idea that, like, a good old movie that if people who are watching this have never seen it, is called High Noon. It's from 1952, and I'll just, without sparing you any other details, it's a very tight little old film, but the basic plot is a guy who's the sheriff of a town knows that a guy and three of his buddies are coming back to get him. We put the first guy in prison, and the other three are coming back to get him. And everyone tells him he should leave town, and he starts to leave town, but then he says, nah, it's the coward's way out. I'm going to stay and fight. And so the film becomes the odds of how does one guy beat four guys? And my dad used to complain about this, and he's right, that there's just like, you start from there and there's just like this escalating principle. Like, well, if one guy beating four guys is exciting, then one guy beating 10 guys would be even more exciting. And one guy beating 20 guys would be even more exciting, as if this principle has no end point. And so that, like, what ends up being, for example, I think that one of the did you watch Game of Thrones? Were you a Game of Thrones person?
I like Game of Thrones, yeah.
I mean, it was a very, very good show, but it started to veer off the rails, I thought, at the point where it gave up its realism to the extent that it had realism within its world for these kinds of things that I don't know why people think they're exciting, because they're not. So in the Battle of the Bastards at the end of, what is that, season 6, like the Jon Snow's team is completely engulfed and surrounded, and it's clear that they're going to be defeated. Like, that's it. Like, and you're thinking in the Game of Thrones that happened up until then, it would have then just been, that's the end of Jon Snow. But now all of a sudden, of course, an army comes at the last second and saves him, or something wildly implausible happens. And in an Indiana Jones, they are wildly implausible. They're wildly implausible from the word go. It's about supernatural stuff.
It's fantasy at the end of the day, isn't it?
Right. So it doesn't bother me. Like, so the things that you're talking about don't bother me, especially because they don't go too far with it, I don't think, in almost any spot. Like, and I mean, if you're going to complain about your unrealism in Indiana Jones, I think like a mine car leaping a gap in track and happening to catch the track on the other side is actually pretty far down the list of things that are like wildly unrealistic. And I'll give you an example from, I'm sure, one of your favorites, The Last Crusade. The last time I watched it, which was recently, I was struck by how absolutely painfully ludicrous it is that Dr. Jones and his father, or Indiana Jones and his father, would somehow manage to escape Berlin with the entire Nazi army looking for them, and go and buy tickets at the Hindenburg thing, and then get on the thing and like somehow get through the entire thing and nobody. And then when they are finally caught, and I have something else to say about this scene, which I'll come back to. that they just happen to be able to climb down and get a warplane that happens to be attached to the bottom of it. And then all of a sudden, 2 Nazi fighters are right on their tail. I mean, none of that sequence makes any sense if you give it any thought at all. But
it's well constructed. It's so, and
so is the Minecraft scene.
Yeah,
which you already said, the minecart scene.
No. But for me, I would say that scene, that whole series in Last Crusade where they escape from the Nazis, that I really
the
love.
bit where he meets Hitler is amazing. I mean, it's absolutely
just
amazing.
like that was, but everything about like even the scene where he's in the plane with he's like 12, 11, 10. 12 o'clock, like that whole series, and like the academic taking out, like for me, even the no ticket piece on the the blimp,
that's funny. It's funny.
The Zeppelin, it's well crafted, well written, well scripted, and again, I'm being hypercritical.
It scores low on the plausibility. I don't agree. I don't disagree with anything you just said. I'm just saying, since you're going into Temple of Doom and saying the plausibility is what's taking you out of the film, I'm saying think very carefully about The Last Crusade, and it will take you out of the film. And you don't have to think that carefully about it.
But for me, I've made a fairly solid argument. I can differentiate 2 different scenes, 2 different films, and say this one is done so well, I'm not bothered about the things that are correctly inaccurate. Whereas in Temple of Doom, I started to really, it started to really occur to me that these things were there, and I was having more trouble giving them a pass.
Why?
Because I don't think they were orchestrated or choreographed as well. I don't think that's why
I don't think that minecart sequence is done exceptionally well.
I think the sequence is done well, but I think the construct of that sequence started to bother me with plausibility throughout. The how fast they were going and how long they were on that car. My mind as an adult was starting to think, how long is this tunnel? And why are the tracks so up and down? Some of the areas it was dead straight. Why are you going up and down? I don't understand. And whereas on the Last Crusade sequence, those questions occurred to me, but I'm like, I'm really enjoying the scene. I don't care. So for some reason, and as human nature,
the minecart scene might go on a little too long. I mean, I think that usually those types of things are a function of time, where it's like, if it lasts 2 or 3 minutes, and that's the same thing, right? As kind of like it's the shadow of what I was just talking about with, if 4 versus 1 is exciting, then 100 versus 1 is even more exciting. Well, like if 3-minute minecart chase is exciting, then a 10-minute minecart chase would be, and sometimes you do have to worry about sustainability.
If they cut that scene off short of all of the if they had made that chase scene, because I love that chase scene where they're going back and forth between the cars and they're hitting the brakes around the corner. I think that's incredible.
Oh,
it does go on, because I've not mentioned the fact that Short Round kicked the shit out of 3 adults, and he's all of like 60 pounds. And I was like, he was, it was, for me, I was like, fine, let's give this a pass. This is Indiana Jones fight choreography. I really enjoy it.
Right.
So it's, and I can't explain why my subjective mind has decided that that's more problematic than Last Crusade. It's a preference thing. Can't control that. But those are the reasons I may be pulling back on Temple of Doom, and more the reason I think I've elevated Last Crusade in the last 10 years above Temple of Doom for me.
Well, let me give you an example of why The Last Crusade, the last time I watched it, was like, every time first of all, until accepting the opening sequence, which is a different thing, and that's interesting enough. But until Sean Connery's character, Henry Jones, arrives into the film, it's really not very good. You know what I mean? It just flat is.
I disagree. I really like that first. I mean, really enjoy
there's a lot in it that's very, very. I was struck by how, like, again, it just felt. You know what it felt like? It felt not unlike, and you and I watched at your recommendation. What is that? National Treasure.
Yeah.
And National Treasure, I think you would probably say is as I mean, it's not that it's bad, but it's like it felt like that level.
It's not. It's definitely. I wouldn't say it's comparatively to National. If we were to compare that to National Treasure, I get that first scene is sort of along those lines, but it's connected
like in the library, and it's not just the first scene. Like, I mean, especially that first scene. I don't know. There was something about the staging, the delivery. It suddenly felt very 90s. even though it was made in, I think, the same year as Batman, so it was like 89. And it just, I don't know, it was just flat and kind of whatever. And then we could talk about the weirdness of the plot point that's completely unnecessary,
Mm.
that Dr. Jones and Indiana Jones have both slept with that Nazi lady, which is just very weird and has nothing to do with the movie otherwise, and is like,
I have
you
no
know,
issue with
you
that.
get the one comment. Well, I don't know. I mean, this is a movie for kids. I mean, people complain about the
Is it?
Temple of Doom. Well, I mean, it was intentionally lighter in tone, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why Temple of Doom got so much crap was because, now, admittedly, there was no PG-13 rating when it came out, and that's, a whole story that everybody knows.
Yeah.
But
Raiders. Yeah,
like,
I did read that.
right, but like Temple of Doom got so much crap because, like, oh well, I took my kid to see this movie and it was too brutal, it was too violent, hearts are being pulled out. And I mean, if I'd taken my 8-year-old to see it on the strength of a PG rating, thinking, oh, it's George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, the guys who did E.T. and Star Wars, this will be fine, and then like someone's beating heart is pulled out of their chest, I would have been upset too. I mean, I
Yeah.
get that, especially as somebody who does have an 8-year-old, but if you think about what I mean, admittedly, it would probably go over most kids' heads, but
Mm.
I feel like, I mean, I don't know, dad and son sharing a woman, like, especially since it's only for the sake of the one joke of talks in her sleep, and then they can have that little interaction. But I mean, it's kind of like, as a kid, I thought that was funny, and probably in my 20s, I still thought it was funny. Watching it as an adult, I'm like, it feels fairly unnecessary and kind of like
No,
creepy more than
never
anything
felt
else.
that way. Never felt it was not you. It's only occurred to me now that you've mentioned it, and even now thinking about it, I think it works in the plot. She was using her body to get in with the Joneses. It
Sure,
makes
which
perfect
introduces
sense.
a concept though that's really not in Indiana. And now you could say that that's creativity or whatever, since I like to cite creativity, but I don't know. I mean, like, it's a little bit more something than I would think that. Yeah,
It's not on brand, I think, for you. Is to me what
yeah,
I
I
would
think
say. It's not on brand for the film
that's a good
franchise.
way of putting it. Right.
I think for the purposes of, I think we've made some pretty. I think we made good progress. And I think we need to probably address Dial of Destiny, because we've left that one out of the whole tapestry here. We've touched on Raiders. We've touched heavily on
I'm
Last
going to come
Crusade.
back to the Last Crusade when we talk about Raiders, but okay, yes, let's talk about the Dial
But
of
I just
Destiny.
want to, just because I want to, it's I think it's an important part of this conversation, because Dial of Destiny to me is an interesting addition to this debate, because I don't have automatic feelings about it. I will say that if somebody's asking me what did I think of it, I really enjoyed the film. I really enjoyed it, and there was elements of it I thought were really well done. I thought the aging technology, or the reverse aging technology, was excellent, and the way they used it was excellent. As far
Yeah.
as in the right time, in the lighting, and it didn't bother me, not one bit. I thought
No,
the
it
story,
was a miraculous thing to see, really.
it was incredible. The
Right.
storyline, it was, I think, getting back to the roots of Indiana Jones. There was historical precedence mixed with sci-fi. The bad guy in that film, I forget what his name is. He's an excellent actor, and he was a great choice for that role.
Well, can we pause for a second, because I would
Yeah.
call the Indiana Jones, outside of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, doesn't really include any sci-fi elements. Like, not Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Last Crusade are all real supernatural, not sci-fi,
Well, maybe
religious.
okay.
Right. I mean, if
Uh,
you're going to make that, if you're going to raise that, if you think sci-fi is an appropriate subject for Indiana Jones, I don't think it's outside of appropriate. Then Kingdom of the Crystal Skull should not bother you. But if it's, you know what I mean, like, if
if it's aliens, it's sci-fi. If it's
it's
terrestrial
God,
based,
if it's
it's
God
supernatural.
or supernatural, I mean, the
Which is going to
stones
be,
are part
for
of
some
life.
people, a hot take. God, I mean, if it's God, it's history, right?
Well, I didn't
It's
say
going to be
I didn't
history.
say it's because the
Uh,
artifacts are historical.
yeah,
I'm
they
not
are.
saying that God is historical, but religion is a distinct category from sci-fi. And the first three films are dealing with a combination of history, So Judaic history, Christian history, to a certain extent, the Thuggee cult, which was a real cult, the history of that in Hindu culture, and then some legendary stuff. I don't know anything about the three stones. I think they were created for the film, but I really don't know about that, to be perfectly blunt. But obviously, the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. The Ark of the Covenant is most clearly on the line of history and legend because it is spoken of in the Bible as a distinct item. The Grail is more of a total legend because the Bible says that there's a Last Supper, but there's no focus whatsoever put to the cup other than to say that Christ passes it around. But the idea that it would be some artifact is really a later development. But the point is, all of that is religion and history and archaeology. None of it is sci-fi, properly speaking.
But whatever we want to call it, I feel like it's getting back to. I don't mind what naming convention we use for it, but I'm happy to go back to. Let's say it's going back to the supernatural roots. Let's say it's getting back into the sort of that religious.
I don't know. Once you include time travel, I think you are in the sci-fi realm. I think it's kind of allowing that to exist there.
Let me get through here because with that film, I mean that connection to history and that archaeology link, more so than the Ancient Aliens archaeology link with crystal skulls. For me, I really like the story arc. I remember it was a long film. It was 2 hours and 40 minutes or something.
Yes,
and I never felt like I was sitting in a long film. It actually ended quite quickly. And the time travel component, I found myself really enjoying that. It reminded me, it sounds silly. I'm just going to tell you what I thought at the time, and I don't give a shit what people think. It reminded me of when I saw Back to the Future for the first time. Because it did a good job of sort of first person perspective of time travel, which is always interesting in any film. And
yeah, I like a time travel movie.
It didn't bother me. I think I read about, because I was curious about the Antikythera, which I read that was more of a Da Vinci thing, and it's very difficult to connect to Archimedes, who really didn't have much connection with time travel, I don't believe. But again, I was willing to allow that to pass, and I just thought it was a film that was really enjoyable, that was really fitting with Indiana Jones, and when I left, I didn't remember that much about it immediately after. My wife, who you're familiar with, she's a very tough film critic. She really enjoyed the film. She thought it was adequate. And when we saw Crystal Skulls, we left there going kind of, that was weird. That just, that was a weird film. So for me, I think
what were your expectations going into Dial of Destiny?
Can I ask that?
Right. Very so were mine. What were your expectations going into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
I didn't know. I didn't know because Indiana Jones was like Harrison Ford at that time. I didn't think of him as being too old for the character.
Right. So were you excited, or at least partially excited?
Nervous for Crystal Skulls going in, maybe because I was such a fan of Indiana Jones.
But there was some part of you that, see, I walked into Dial of Destiny, like I'd read all the reviews, heard all the trash talk, heard how awful it was, heard how bloated it was, heard it was already losing money. Because by the time I saw it was like the third week, and it was a financial catastrophe. It was this, it was that. So I went in basically thinking to myself, and I had not rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which again, I had regarded as awful. So I thought to myself, this is the only thing that this has to get over is the low bar of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I went in, the medium bar.
right, which has changed. But at the time, I'm giving you the exact thought process I had going into Dial of Destiny, and I felt like it had. Like I went in, I was like, yes, this is, obviously he's 80 years old now. He can't do what he did, 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But it's like more or less an Indiana Jones movie that I can get behind. And I really wanted to not be an asshole about it. That was the other thing. I wanted to be charitable, thinking to myself, And so between those two things, I think I walked out of Dial of Destiny thinking to myself, well, I certainly gave it a very wide latitude benefit of the doubt. And I therefore came out thinking it was a pretty fine movie.
Yeah.
And see, now that's why when I go back and rewatch The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I think to myself, I really didn't give this movie a wide latitude. And now when I do, I think, I think it's clearly a better film than Dial of Destiny.
See, I disagree. I think Dial of Destiny, for me, I didn't struggle. Like, again, I just immersed myself in the film. And I wasn't distracted by anything. I was interested to see where the path was going, where the story arc was going. I had to use the toilet at one point, and I was desperate to hold because I wanted to see what was going to be coming in the next scene. I like the callbacks. I like the nostalgia pieces. I like the fact they brought back the actual actor for Salah. It was very good. I like the fact that we're bringing the Nazis back into the fold. There was a lot,
right. People
and
whined
even
about
then,
the Soviets, so we figured out how to get the Nazis back in, hence the time travel.
yeah, and it's for me as well. The thing that I was most worried about was this is an 81-year-old Harrison Ford, and this was a film that I did read it was action from start to finish, and never once thought that this guy's 80 in this film. The way they choreographed the chase scenes, and it just never occurred. I mean, it was something that was heavily on my mind going in, and it just didn't pop into my head during the film in and of itself. Whereas when I watched Crystal Skulls, and I don't feel like I went into that film any different than I went into Dial of Destiny. I think I was more pessimistic because of the reviews of Dial of Destiny that I had sort of half listened to. So for me, I think that was a demarcation line that Crystal Skulls is for me still the bottom of the list. And Dial of Destiny is now in a debate with Temple of Doom, because when I watched Temple of Doom recently and I watched Dial of Destiny, now I've only seen it once, and you know, I might have a bit of recency bias with that film, but I'm struggling to put Temple of Doom ahead of Dial of Destiny, and that's a hot take. I think that's a controversial.
I think so. And Sean, I mean, once again, I Dial of Destiny, I basically enjoyed. I'm going to say I basically enjoyed it, but you want to talk about being taken out of the film for a minute? Do you recall the sequence where they're on the boat and I forget the character's name, I'm sorry, is translating.
She was very good in it, by the way.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought she did a good job. But she's translating this thing for them so that they can find the thing in Sicily or wherever they're going next. And then she manages to start a sequence where she and Indiana Jones and the kid get off the boat and start heading away towards where they really want to go to. And the bad guy gets the binoculars and puts his binoculars up to his face and says, "Oh, they're not heading north; they're heading west. They're heading east, or whatever he says."
Yeah.
How do you go from they're heading east to finding them at the exact location that they're going to without any other knowledge?
Didn't they follow them?
Well, I mean, you have to guess that must be, but the idea seems to be that they're so far away that following them and the boat is disabled or something, as I recall.
So this is a person.
I remember sitting there going like, okay, and I'm not the only one. I've seen reviews that talk about that and saying like that's a moment where they just appear Deus Ex Machina, like where they need to be at the end of the film for the sake of having, you know, a final chase sequence before you find the Dial of Destiny or what have you.
See, for me, that was a bit redeeming to a degree, because I thought, well, they can clearly see they're going somewhere. They've rused them and they've pulled away. So they would be really stupid to just go to the place after being sort of overrun by the three people, and they escaped. I can't remember the Phoebe Waller-Bridge. That was bothering me. I was having trouble with that. That was the female actress, of course.
Sorry, and this is what I mean. I am no longer a movie buff. I don't know who anybody is. Sorry, Phoebe.
But
it's not personal, Phoebe.
I think it's a fair point. But again, you know, if you're gonna, let's say, if you're gonna be critical of Last Crusade for some of the what was the one that you said, the inconsistency with the Zeppelin scene, I would say that the Zeppelin scene is way more problematic than that scene.
You mean probable?
No, problematic. The Zeppelin scene is way more problematic than
the really?
Yeah. No, that scene. We're comparing scenes.
Yeah, I know. I understand. You think that the Zeppelin scene is more problematic. I guess you're right. I mean,
because I could say this is somebody who's got
900 reasons why.
Somebody who's got obviously endless resource, who can then say they're going west. They're clearly not going in the direction they need to be where they need to be. And I don't know the logistics of where they are in space time to be able to determine that. But I'm not going to nitpick on that. I think there's other things you can nitpick on in that film. I think the Archimedes and time travel thing and the Antikythera is a bit more problematic because, you know, they had to sort of get this this construct in with Archimedes so that whole storyline of, you know, the Nazis and Indiana Jones and that sequence actually being a part of history without them knowing it. And I think there's some time travel components as far as how did Archimedes know where the wormhole was going to be? If that's not how his device
I
works.
mean, I'm not going to sit there. Things I'm not going to parse out is how did Archimedes know where the wormhole would be in
That's
this
exactly
island?
it.
Get the hell
But
out of here.
we're
I mean, like,
parsing. But
I'm willing
you're
to accept
parsing. You're parsing out to I think a greater degree this smaller plot hole, whereas I'm actually saying there's bigger plot holes in the film that I've passed up on.
Uh-huh.
That is a much bigger plot hole.
Well, I do, except that one is set in. See, once you start getting into the time travel piece, all bets are off. When you're still dealing in the relatively real world of we're both looking for an artifact and they're chasing me, and we're both trying to figure out where it is, and you're giving me this giant head start and implying that my boat is disabled, as I recall that's what happened, then you are leaving open the question, well, how do they figure it out? But I agree. I mean, it's still just a movie where you could say, they figured it out any one of a number of ways. Hey, one of my favorite movies, The Fugitive, the one plot hole that I think is in that film, as much as I like it, is that he winds up at Cook County Hospital looking for the one-armed man. How did he know it was Cook County Hospital? Could have been any hospital. Chicago's got one hospital. I don't think so, But anyway, and I've watched that movie a bunch of times trying to figure out, do they tip it off anywhere? I don't think they do. It's just he just guesses the right hospital on the first try. But you know what? It's a movie.
I mean, when we go, if we're talking time travel,
I'm only using that one. I'm only used that though in relation to your thinking that like, oh, somehow it took you out of the Temple of Doom. I think that is just one continuous action sequence. And sure, it's a little over the top at times, but it's whatever. This is like a plot point that's just like, oh, there they are. How did they figure it out?
Yeah.
We declined to say. You know what I mean? Like, but without the nitpicking, Dial of Destiny. I mean, it was, again, none of these movies are what I would call bad. On reflection, do I think it's probably the least of the Indiana Jones movies? Yes, I do. And I think that I mean, a lot of it just has to do with the time that has passed, and it's hard to put together an Indiana Jones movie where he, of necessity, can't totally be the star of his own film. Does that
not make it a better film than Crystal Skulls, though? Just the fact that they were able to pull off a highly serviceable Indiana Jones film. I thought the scripting and the pacing of the movie was excellent. And the fact that he was 182 didn't bother me one iota. I
mean, if you're talking from a technical level that they were able to get around it, I would agree to a certain extent that is true. It mostly, I think, again, it's not that it's a bad film. It's just that it I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, why is it that I would not rate it as highly as the others? I mean, it's longer. The zip off the fastball with Harrison Ford is certainly present, but I mean, that's to be expected. That's to be expected.
But they aged him appropriately. I will say, in this film, though. They did age him appropriately. So he was an old man in this film.
They did. And I think some of the choices that I wouldn't have made that, I guess they're closing out the character. And so they want some kind of character arc. Obviously, Shia LaBeouf was written out of the movies, and that's because audiences didn't respond to him well.
Yeah.
So we have to kill him off. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, watching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull again, again, it's just it's giving into that bullying of the audience a little bit. It's like, well, I mean, obviously there was a notion once, although they didn't follow through on it, that Shia LaBeouf, that there might be some more Indiana Jones movies with Shia LaBeouf, and then the movie just wasn't received well, and that notion died on the vine. So I don't know why you couldn't just use, like in Jaws, right? In Jaws 2. What Richard Dreyfuss is not in Jaws 2 because and so they just have one line of dialogue. Someone says, "Oh, can we call Hooper again?" And he's like, "Nope, he's on oceanographic, blah blah blah, and he can't be reached for 6 months." I mean, they could have done something with that. Instead, they introduced this idea that he died, and that this has made sad Indiana Jones, who lives in an apartment by himself and eats off over the sink and doesn't barely bother to get dressed and is nasty to everybody, and then has this speech about losing his son. And I mean, I guess it just depends on how you look at things. I don't know that I feel the same way about that I felt about Han Solo, the way he was presented in The Force Awakens. Did I need to see some emo kid whining about how Han Solo was a bad dad and killing him in front of Chewbacca?
Yeah,
No, I did not. That
yeah,
is not the Han Solo I needed.
yeah.
Do I need? It's not that it's bad. It's just that not the choice I would have made.
See,
I
I
think I would have
disagree with
given.
that completely. I think that Han Solo, Christ, that's
Ugh.
that Indiana Jones, that was very on brand for what I thought. Like for me, I thought that was extraordinarily plausible, given he wasn't an easy person. Like if he was married, happily married to Marion, and his son was there and they had a great relationship. That was not the character that the character that we loved was the hard to love but lovable character. And I thought
When
that
is
that
Indiana Jones ever hard to love?
the whole opening scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark is him walking out on Marion and coming back when he needs something, and then leaving her tied up when he needs to do something for himself instead of saving her and bailing out on this quest for the Ark. It's not going anywhere. So he's not necessarily a redeeming. I mean, to be fair, he was trying to save the world from the Nazis. So before you catch me on that was I'm just riffing here.
No, I'm actually thinking you have a point, because then in Raiders he gets a bit of a character arc, because when he does catch up with the Nazis and they have the arc at the end of the film, he threatens. He's got the rocket launcher, and they ask him what he wants. Or they say, "Surely you don't think you can escape?" And he says, "Well, that depends on how reasonable you're all willing to be. All I want is the girl." So he's
Yeah.
now, as versus earlier in the film, right, where he is willing, like he's driven by finding the thing.
Yeah.
Now he's so actually, it's a fair point. It's a fair. All right, so maybe he's a bit more of an
Yeah.
anti-hero than
Well,
I kind of
last
gave him credit.
Last Crusade, it was all about him being an anti-hero anyway. He was somebody
In the
who,
Last Crusade.
yeah, he didn't love his daddy. He had daddy issues. He was somebody who was referenced as an arrogant guy, and he was a bit of a dick to the blonde, or a bit, sort of over bullshit, and just trying to get in her pants the whole time. He was a flawed character. He was always a flawed character. And for him to digress and to not be with Marion is on brand for a relationship he had with his son in what was the end of Crystal Skulls, which seemed to be good, and his son died based on a disagreement they had, which again was on brand for that relationship in Crystal Skull. To me,
Right.
that is like the best or most natural evolution for Harrison Ford, to be that lovable rogue who's been and it's not as if he did something wrong, like he killed somebody or stole something and he's trying to get redemption. He's had some bad shit in his life that has made him not care about anything and want to be on his own. Him being on his own he's been on his own his whole life in every film.
Well, you've made an eloquent case for why that should be. I
God
don't.
damn, I did.
Yeah. I
Fucking
don't know.
right.
I mean, I could see why Marion was maybe an inconvenience for this story, who needed to be set aside. Um, but at the same time, I don't know, like depressing old Indiana Jones. I mean, it might just go to, do I need this film at all? And the answer, of course, to that question is no, I don't.
But
But
I do, for the reason that you felt about Crystal Skulls. And this is why I equate it to Rocky Balboa. Rocky Balboa, in my view, was made to make up for the way they finished it in Rocky Five. That
oh,
was
I think that
such
I've not
a
even seen
garbage
Rocky
film.
Five,
It
and I
was.
think I know that. Yeah.
We have to do Rocky just so I can force you to sit through that. That was such a garbage film that they made Rocky Balboa, and it didn't have to be great to do what it needed to do, which was open the book and close it with a new finish. Just start over. We'll get this last film right, and then we'll call it a day. And I felt like Dial of Destiny did that. It sort of did a good job of closing these loose ends up, because I don't feel like Crystal Skulls did a great job of that. It was a bit too happily ever after for Indiana Jones. Now, granted, it did have a ever after component to the end, but it was a bit more open to interpretation on where they go from here. It wasn't like this happy marriage at the end.
No, I do agree with that. And I will say that the one thing that is true of The Last Crusade against Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is that the ending of The Last Crusade is far better. It's more poetic.
Right off into the sunset, yes.
Right off into the sunset. And what did you find? Illumination and, all of this. It plays into the artifact well. I mean, The Last Crusade was called The Last Crusade for a reason. It would have been a fine capper to the franchise.
Yeah. Rocky
So-
4 for Rocky in a comparison. If that was the last Rocky, fucking A. I mean,
Rocky 4 is an amazing movie, but not for the reason that most people seem to think it is. But
I think we might be on the same page with that. But again, we'll come back to it. So I think just looking at, because we're here now for an hour 16. We haven't.
We need to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark.
We have to talk about Raiders. I think so. For me,
and you know what? This is one of those things that bothers me. I will say I can judge whether or not you're good at movies if you think The Last Crusade is better, which many people seem to think, than Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark is really a fantastic film. Yeah. I mean, it is a series, for as much as it is a serial and a callback to fun and this and that, there is something at base serious and awe-struck and awe-inspiring about that film that is not true of any of the others. And in part because there isn't as much comedic relief. The subject matter is taken fairly seriously. And you're talking about something that I think of all the artifacts, and this is, obviously really something that I think is interesting about the Dial of Destiny, and to its credit, is that whereas the previous 4 films all dealt with either, religious / supernatural, or in the case of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, what appears that way, but then becomes a sci-fi object, which I think is an interesting move, as I've said. Dial of Destiny, to its credit, I think tries to find something different and says that this is not either of those. This is a mathematical and scientific, piece that we found. But having said all that, of the 5, the most compelling clearly is the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, what it represents. Yeah. So go ahead.
I think the one thing that, and just to kind of bring back Star Wars to the conversation, and I don't have quite the evolved views you do on some of these points, because again, I think
that's right. I'm evolved. Unlike you, you're a knuckle dragger over there. But go on.
I like to make sure that the bar is lowered for me, so the expectations are that much easier for me to get over with the audience. So let's make sure that my bar is low.
Excuse me, I have to fix a martini and put my ascot on for the rest of this conversation. Go on.
So with Raiders, and I think with Star Wars, I think if you have an expectation, Raiders of the Lost Ark had no precedent. And to be able to carve out a niche from nothing is the precedent. And there's no way that Last Crusade, for example, or Temple of Doom, I don't think was ever going to be greater. It was going to be like an almost impossible task. If anything, as good as would have been the standard they would be going for.
Or just a straight copy of, which also would have been a problem.
Simply because Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, none of those exist without Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I think Star Wars is the same thing. When I went into the first 2 prequels, you go in with an understanding, and even the new sequels that have come out, I'm a little bit more charitable to those, because all that's doing is giving me my Star Wars fix. It's allowing me to see, take me back to my childhood when I remember watching Return of the Jedi, and this is my time here. So you can't. But for me, I when I look at Raiders of the Lost Ark and when I look at the original Star Wars, of course the others aren't going to be as good. No shit. Like, who in their mind would ever go into the first Star Wars or Crystal Skulls or Dial of Destiny or even Last Crusade for that matter and have any expectation that they're going to be as good as or surpass Raiders? It's a ridiculous.
But I don't hear most people. I mean, I think that which one is better, The Last Crusade or Raiders, is about an even split. I feel like.
I don't agree with that whole point. Last Crusade is in my view, it's a very good Indiana Jones. It's top 3.
It's a very good movie. I would watch it anytime. Saying that the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull I might give a nod to is not to say that Last Crusade is a bad film. It is not.
No. But I think we're agreeing that Raiders, and I think I'm actually sort of kind of supporting your point here that Raiders is the gold standard because you
Oh,
can't.
and it's a different film. I mean,
It,
yeah.
but it's the genesis of the character,
Oh,
and
of course.
if we forget about how well the film is done in isolation, the fact that it's carved out this niche and this timeline, this character arc that is still going this day, and is still, the film may not have done well. That doesn't mean it's a bad film. Films are different nowadays anyway. I'm surprised Barbie has done as well as it has. Maybe I need to go see that.
I wouldn't
But
mind seeing it. I hear it's pretty good.
but I don't. For me, it's an impossible proposition for me to think that anything would have been better than Raiders. So I don't look at those other films in the same way that I look at Raiders. I look at Raiders as the gold standard that every other film is measured upon.
Well, and I think that that's right. In fact, I would go another step and say I wouldn't even bother with Raiders, as we have not in this conversation with the other four, because what Raiders is, I mean, it's an entirely different class of film.
Yeah.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, and you could even say, like I've said, that The Last Crusade is derivative of it, but and to some degree it kind of is. But on another level, you could argue that why they did what they did with The Last Crusade, making it like kind of comedic and really, I mean, even more so than the Temple of Doom, like really playing up the humor elements, and is to try to kind of recapture some of the magic of Raiders of the Lost Ark if you were somebody who didn't like the Temple of Doom, by using a Judeo-Christian artifact and in some ways a similar story, but with a completely different tone, like one that's really about the ha-has and kind of a lighthearted laugh, because Raiders of the Lost Ark really doesn't have that. One thing that I read recently that I thought was a very interesting point that I hadn't really thought of, obviously now when you see the films, like if you go on Disney Plus or wherever, or if you were to, I guess, buy them on DVD, I have to think, did they already do it for my DVD set that I have from like 2005, right before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, or 2006, whenever that, they've retitled Raiders of the Lost Ark to be in line with the others, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that is a nod to the point that you made. Honestly, it's a good point that, in explaining Indiana Jones as the anti-hero, he is one of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is not Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is one of them. He's there, and that the Ark is not something to be raided. And that's really what he kind of like winds up learning as the film goes forward. I think one of the things that's a dead giveaway why, what I'm talking about with Raiders being just a different sort of film than the others, is that my sister used to complain about how, it's not as good as The Last Crusade because like they find the arc in the middle of the movie. Right. But see, like if you watch Shakespearean tragedies and comedies too, but classic structure is to have the climax be in the middle. And, that's not something that happens in a lot of Hollywood films, especially comedies, like where the plot climax is at the end. That's what audiences expect. But if you look at the structure of a classic piece of drama, the climax is in the middle, and there might be a secondary climax at the end, as there is, of course, because it's not just a question of finding the arc, and then it's a question of opening it and what's in there, right? But it's done brilliantly. We've talked about the character arc from Raiders to from the end of the film from the beginning of the film to the end, when you see that he changes his whole focus from I need the arc to I just want to get Marion out of here. And then even closing his eyes at the end of the film. And that's the whole trick, is why do they survive? Because they close their eyes and they don't look at it. They specifically avoid that. There is some humility in the face of all of this, that the Nazis are not exhibiting, that it's not just a race for a prize. And in fact, the prize itself is something that maybe is supposed to be a little bit beyond human understanding, and rightfully so. It's a tremendous, and the fact, I mean, the ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that ending scene is so iconic and so brilliant. And whoever thought of it, I guess Lawrence Kasdan or whoever, I know he's the credited script writer, but whoever's idea that was, that final shot of it becoming something that, is found, taken a look at, and people realize, what, this is something that needs to be, it's better lost, is such a brilliant concept. And why, I mean, if you're looking at the difference, I wanted to get this in earlier. This is my last shot at Last Crusade, but I just want to get this in. The other thing about Raiders is that it's got a cleverness to it that's original to it, that's not present in the other films. So like obviously, famously in Temple of Doom, it's a bit clever. that he tries to do the shoot the swordsman trick like he does
Yeah.
in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but then he reaches for the gun and it's not there. That's a cute little callback. But think too about like one of the most clever bits in Raiders of the Lost Ark is he somehow, and this is on the implausible scale, he hops on top of a submarine and somehow the submarine goes to some place and he is not knocked off of it. But he gets to wherever this Nazi boat thing is, and he does the typical movie thing. He knocks out a soldier and starts to put on his uniform so he can blend in. And what happens?
It doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit. That's hilarious. And it's a bit like, playing on a movie. And that film is filled with these kinds of little, like winking about the tropes and like playing off of them. Now think about The Last Crusade. He does it in 2 consecutive scenes. The second time with the waiter on the Zeppelin, who's clearly like at least 8 inches shorter than he is. And it might look that the uniform's a little tight, but there's literally no comment about it whatsoever. I mean, there's no way that uniform would fit Harrison Ford. Not a chance in 1,000. And he did it prior to that with or he does it in the previous sequence when he's in Berlin and he knocks up. I mean, you see him dragging the feet and then he comes out dressed like a Nazi officer. Like they deploy it twice in sequence, twice consecutively in that film with no comment. Like it's just something that you do all the time. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's there and they make fun of it. You know what I mean? And that's the cleverness and the deep cleverness of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
You're a son of a bitch, by the way, because I never picked up on that, and I don't want to pick up on that. Don't want to know about it.
I don't think I really noticed it till the last time I looked at that.
By the way, that gunshot scene where the swordsman and he pulls the gun out and shoots him. I'm getting confused now because I've watched them all. Was that Last Crusade?
No, that's Raiders.
That's Raiders. That was improv, that scene.
Yes, it was.
Which I didn't realize that until I was doing some reading on it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that supposedly they had done some shooting where he was going to do the sword fight, and then he was getting tired of it and just pulled the gun out. So
I do like with any of the film too with Raiders, and it's something that I like to call back to in Last Crusade. It's seeing him in his university area, just to see him as an archaeologist and not this larger than life character that lives this forever traveling life, and to see his home base and to see, he does come from somewhere. And that's something I really liked with how Raiders did a really good job, I think, of introducing his character, as part of that franchise. He is an archaeologist. He's not just some crazy guy with a whip who goes out and tries, he could be a marauder for all, in the opening sequence. And it's that sort of that development of that character that Harrison Ford, I think, so well embodied in Raiders, just, I think, set the tone for the entire franchise.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything about Raiders is just, and it's funny. I showed it to my girlfriend's 13-year-old son, or we started watching it, and he got bored, and I know it's funny how modern audiences.
What he got? What I missed that?
Bored.
Oh, he got bored.
He got bored. And it's funny how modern audiences, I mean, I know tastes change and all that. I don't think of Raiders as a type of movie where, I mean, are there some slower sequences where we have to sit and talk and, discuss some things? Yes. But I think that the slowness at times, and when I say slow, it's not even that it's like the scene in the map room where it's, today I feel like they would make that scene go for like 10 seconds if they spent much time on it at all. But like the music, the slowly moving sunbeam, like it gives this sense of like awe and mystery. And when they actually find the Ark, the expressions, and that's to your point about Harrison Ford and his acting ability, like you can see the avarice almost on his face, like the fact that he's not, he's there leading this, but he's just like the Nazis telling people lift the stone, like he's not there helping, he's there leading an expedition. It's giving that dark side of Indiana in that film, and him treating it like a relic, like the Nazis are, like a prize to be had, until obviously things change as the film goes on. It's just a wonderful, and even the ending sequence, which I understand now with the ghosts and all that. Now that's probably the worst looking bit, in terms of like how special effects have evolved.
At the time, though, that wasn't. This is where I think people now have to be a bit charitable to those films. At that time, that was not looked at as poor special effects.
Oh no, of course not.
That
But
was
I'm
looked
saying
as
like
an excellent sequence.
right. But to a modern audience, I realize that
Yeah.
that suffers the most probably of all the things in it from just not looking like you would do today or looking as good as maybe you would make it look today. But still, you know,
This reminds me, actually, sorry, but I'm going to dump on Last Crusade. You'll be happy to hear, because that reminded me of the one scene in all of the franchise. Well, no, to be fair, it was the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think you give a pass to like the blood scene where, you know, the guy's skin comes off and his blood drains out when he looks at the Ark. I feel like I can give that a pass. In Last Crusade, when Donovan turns old, and the effects go from him getting a little bit gray, you know, arthritic, and then that scene with his hair growing long and drying up to dust. That's a really, I think, for Steven Spielberg standards, I think that's a poor execution at that time.
yeah, interesting. I always think it's fine.
I don't know what it was. It reminded me, and I don't know if it was done that way on purpose, but whenever I watch it, to me, it makes me think it's like a nostalgic, like they almost pulled the old effects out from 1980 and pulled that into Last Crusade instead of doing something modern. And I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was only the problem is that the difference between Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade, special effects hadn't moved that much. You were still doing practical effects. It was 1989, not not
Was Last Crusade
1990.
89?
It was 89. Same year as Batman, a couple weeks before it.
Maybe I'm being a
So-
bit uncharitable now.
Maybe you are. Although I thought you were going to tell me that it reminds you of the Crypt Keeper, which he does for a second. From
That even makes it worse, though.
yeah,
That
well, I
makes
thought
it
that's what you were
automatically
going
worse.
for. I thought that's what you were going
Oh,
for.
man.
That is the Crypt Keeper. One last bit about Raiders, as I'm sitting here thinking about just the beauty of that film and the subtlety of it. I think that is worth thinking about. The movie doesn't comment on it much, but it's there as just another little piece that what a great choice. Belloc, his primary adversary throughout the film, is Jewish. And in opening the Ark, they have to have a Jewish ceremony. And, the guy says to him, like, are you happy with this Jewish, or I'm uncomfortable with this Jewish ritual, and he says, well, would you be more comfortable opening the Ark in front of the Führer, in Berlin? And so like, there's this even idea that like the prize is so high that everybody's compromising, their values, right? Belloc, the Jewish, archaeologist who's willing to toss aside his Jewish heritage to find it. The Nazis who are willing to collaborate with a Jew to find it. Harrison Ford or Indiana Jones who's willing, to leave Marion tied up to get it. All these things, right? And then they collapse. Like those who are like it's Indiana Jones' refusal to look at it when finally presented. I mean, his life, it's the greatest possible prize an archaeologist could find, and yet when the thing is open, we close our eyes, we don't look, and it's that redeems him. I mean, it's an amazing bit.
It's an interesting point because that is a reoccurring theme in all but one film. I'm going to rephrase this. It's a reoccurring theme in Last Crusade, specifically around Christ. What's her name? The blondes.
Allison Duty.
Well, what was the character's name?
Dr. Schneider.
Dr. Schneider at the end, who she was killed by her avarice. If you look at Crystal Skulls, Ray Winston's character died because he was trying to gather as much treasure as he could as he was getting out the door and ended up getting sucked in by this alien spaceship. Temple of Doom doesn't really go down that road. There's not really, it's almost as if the artifacts aren't that important to Indiana Jones as such. It's interesting to him, and he's doing.
No, he's white savior. He's there to get the children out.
Yeah, he's there to save the day. But the interesting thing in Dial of Destiny is they've kind of brought it full circle to where now he's conceding that this experience is more important than my life, and he's the one now at the end of Dial of Destiny who wants to give himself up for that prize of knowledge, understanding, and access. But it's a different kind of greed where he's not looking for money. He's looking for awareness, understanding, enlightenment, and he wants to be kept back, which part of me wonders if the film would have been better had he been kept back and seen on a hieroglyph with a fedora or something like that. But
Yeah, I thought they would go there. I thought that that's where he would leave himself, or that, like, do a time loop thing where this is the way it happened because this is the way it always had to happen. That's how, you
yeah,
know what I mean, like that kind of thing. But yeah, they didn't really do it. I will say that the ending, I was surprised that Dial of Destiny kind of got a little choked up there when he's meeting Archimedes. Like I
yeah.
was like, wow, this is something.
That was, I
Uh,
don't know what it was, and I don't care if I'm slated. I'm just giving my, again, idiot's review. That sequence when they travel in time with Archimedes, like I just really enjoyed that. It's hard for me to quantify why.
if you had told me ahead of time that was in the film, I would have been like, oh, that's so
That's going to
stupid.
be shit. Yeah,
Right. And then I saw it. I was like, you know what? I'm just rolling with this. And I don't know. It worked. Somehow it worked.
yeah. I mean, they
Um,
must have, in my head. I was like, okay, so clearly, what was the character's name? Phoebe Waller. It was some stupid name, like
I
Moose or
can't.
something like that. What was it?
Yeah, I think that sounds right, actually.
No, it wasn't Moose, but it was something with an M.
Phoebe Waller Bridge. Okay.
What the hell was her character name? I'm so glad we prepare for these. It's Helena, but she had a nickname.
Helena. Okay. Yeah. Well, Mutt. No, Mutt was the son in the. I don't know.
Mum.
Does it matter?
Oh, fuck, that's gonna bother me. In the comments, if anybody's watching this, put in the comments who that is, and I'm gonna know by the time we finish this.
Uh-huh.
However, I remember thinking, like, you kind of go back to my conversation on sci-fi. In my mind, I was putting together the conversation that she was having with Archimedes, not speaking the language, saying, "Listen, I need you to help me get him on the plane. He's unconscious, so clearly I need someone to like carry him." Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I thought you were going to say something.
No. I'm indicating to 1 second, but indicate my son is off camera trying to get my attention about something.
Ah,
Which I will say. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, and I know you want to wrap up, is the women in it, because that often gets a lot of attention. Is the women in Indiana Jones, and
yeah.
some people think that the definition of which film is best hinges to a large degree on the various heroines, especially in the first three. Like most people tend to think that Marion Ravenwood is the best, and I would probably tend to agree with that. Like,
Yeah, I think the first one is obviously the
right.
best for me.
People give a hard time to Kate Capshaw in the Temple of Doom, and I know. I mean, she was performing the character as written. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's what they were going for. Now, here's the
thing. It was a
thing,
rough character. It was a rough character for the film.
I mean, like, is it though? I mean, I understand certainly the feminists, and again, I understand why this is not. I'm not one of these incel bastards who thinks that like somehow there isn't legitimate criticism of the way women are portrayed in film, and often, and maybe someone like the damsel in distress bit might be too much in Temple of Doom. But having said that, again, it's patterned after films where that kind of comedic relief would have been present in the 30s and 40s. Well,
it's a period piece,
and it's over the top too. It's like that she's like where you're taking like the urban glamour girl and putting her like basically a flapper, a 20s flapper, if you it's the 30s, but like that sort, and dropping them into like Bangkok Palace and the thuggy cult, and so I don't know. I mean, it's in keeping. To me, it fits within what she's supposed to be, and I don't have a lot of problem with it.
I agree. My issue with her character isn't her as an actress, and even her character. I think it's accurate even for the time. But are you still there, by the way? I think I lost you. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm listening. I was listening with one ear. There's a giant spider I'll have to take care of in a little bit.
Yeah, no worries.
Yes.
But I'll just get this point. Do you want to step away?
No. I want to hear. I was listening the whole time.
So so her character, I think, is appropriate for the period. I think it's appropriate for it's a period piece. There's going to be dated stuff in there. We can't run from stuff that's representing historical precedent because there would have been a character like her at that time. It's completely plausible, but her character, just when I watch it, it's just the whining throughout the film, and it's like it's a bit that just. But it's a bit that goes on and on and on, and it's like.
Well, let me be fair to Kate Capshaw at the very least. To the degree that that's true, blame the writers and the direct. Like, it's not her fault. She's doing clearly what was asked.
I agree. No, I'm saying that the writing of her character now I find it troublesome when I watch the film. It's more annoying than supporting of the film.
Right. And I guess, like, to your earlier word, which was a good word for some of the humor in Temple of Doom, it does have, it feels, Temple of Doom does feel at times like it was written by a couple of 13-year-olds. Like, ooh, what would be fun? Bugs are
Yeah.
disgusting. So we'll have a girl have to reach in and touch the bugs and she'll scream.
There was a
and go,
belch in it.
ew.
I loved it when I was
I
18.
say 13, maybe more like 10.
It was
11.
missing like a fart. It was missing a fart or two at that dinner
Right.
too.
Well, you could, like, if it were made today, you would get many farts, right?
Yeah.
Like back then, not so much. And then, like, Allison Duty's kind of I mean, they don't give her much. I mean, in the Last Crusade, like, they flip the switch on her character in the first 40 minutes. Then she's just one of the baddies. And so, I mean, she's fine. I think she's fine. I think it's interesting to have her be, like, sort of, and you're right, it's a rehash of the concept of somebody who's not necessarily in it, as she even says in the film. I believe in the Grail, not the swastika. So she's maybe using her position within the Nazi party to get what she wants rather than believing in the Nazi cause per se. She's just, she does a fine job for what they've given her to do.
Yeah.
Kate Blanchett, her Russian accent's not always convincing. Whenever she gets to a long it starts to slip, I think. But I think she's fine in that film.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
And I think the young one in this, Phoebe, I'm sorry,
Yeah, she played Muttley or something. I can't remember that. But like her character it does lead questions to sort of the new Disney direction. They've opened the door to her picking up a franchise off of Indiana Jones with her character. I will say, I'm not going to necessarily support that. I'd probably watch it, but I think her acting and her character development in isolation could be strong enough to support a completely separate film.
Maybe, but also the performance of this film at the box office, I think, makes it unlikely. I mean, if they thought that, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull made money, yet it ruined Shia LaBeouf's career anyway. So
Transformers ruined Shia LaBeouf's career, I think.
Well, maybe that's so.
So we should let's try to figure out a way to rank this, and I think we agree on this.
Yes.
Now, I think we are all over the shop, and we're going to have to find some middle grounds here somehow to be able to rank this communally. And I think we don't agree on the worst film.
No, we don't.
I would argue that if
we don't really agree on the order after this, because I think I would go Temple of Doom.
So let's do your order. So you would say Temple of Doom. Yep.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Man, that's rough. Okay.
I mean, I admit to being slightly cheeky on that, but also not entirely.
Okay.
Then The Last Crusade. And then bringing up the rear Dial of Destiny.
Dial of Destiny.
Yeah. And I will say that among the 3 and 4 could be easily flipped for me. I mean, but I want to give a nod to the creative risk that Lucas and Spielberg took in Dial of Destiny, or excuse me, in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that they did not take, particularly in The Last Crusade. Yeah. So, I mean, those two are flippable. So in terms of what's in the top 3, we could both theoretically have The Last Crusade and Raiders of the Lost Ark in there. And then, but Temple of Doom has to be in the top 3 minimally for me. And I think really it's number 2.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do, because I have an obvious first and last. So I think for me, Crystal Skulls is no doubt last. Raiders is first. I think that's easy.
Especially since you refuse to call Crystal Skull by its proper name, so we can tell.
There was more than one skull. I can't help it. So second is for me, I'm going to go with Last Crusade, just because I think part of me thinks I could make an argument that if Last Crusade was on and Crystal Skulls was on, over the next 10 years, you're going to be more inclined to watch the 18th viewing of Last Crusade over the 18th viewing of Crystal Skulls. That's my only contention. I think this will be. That has more to do
with nostalgia. The first one of these that I saw was The Last Crusade.
I would say that, though, not because of nostalgia, because I think it's an easier film to watch. It's a better written film. I think it holds up better. Personally, you disagree with me, obviously, on that.
It is better written. That's the thing. So I mean, that's why they're flippable. Is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade a better written film? Almost without question. Are the acting performances stronger because you have Sean Connery and Harrison Ford still, at the tops of their games? Yes, yes, indeed. And that's the strength of the Last Crusade, without a doubt. So
Well,
yeah,
for me, this is where I see it, and I'll be honest. Like, you could, I think ultimately I have to keep Dial of Destiny here. But when I watch Dial of Destiny, I don't want recency bias to impact what I think is still a fairly iconic film in Temple of Doom. That's sort of uh, proven, has proven itself the test of time, and Dial of Destiny hasn't, which is why I'm putting it here at number 4. But for me, Temple of Doom is comfortably overtaken by Last Crusade. Raiders, I think we both agree, 100% the gold standard. And Crystal Skulls, I'm giving it a hard time. I didn't hate it when I watched it, but I still find it disappointing. And again, I just feel like there was so much potential in making that a really great film, and I feel like they just missed an opportunity with that, which for me makes Dial of Destiny a higher ranking film, almost a third rank film, because it holds its own given the challenges they had in making it. So I think we do have it's interesting how different our lists are. I didn't expect them to be that different.
well, I had no idea you would be this wrong. That's all, Sean.
It's but see, that's completely understand. He who is ignorant isn't going to be fully aware of all the components at play. You don't have that understanding, and I'm okay with that.
All right, we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Rocky film. See, I'm going to tell you, Sean, as a tag to this, if you get me to watch Rockies 2, 3, and 5, you will have really done something. And I'm not sure it's something. I have seen Rocky 3. I will say that I saw it once when I was 6, or at least most of it. But I left the screening crying when Burgess Meredith's character died. But Rocky 2, I mean, I'm going to tell you, if I watch it, I'm going to hate watch it. So, and I can explain why, I suppose, when we next when we duke it out over
if we
those.
decide to do Rocky, I think it would be unfair of you to give.
Do we do the creeds in that with too?
No. I think that's a separate franchise in and of itself.
I mean, the first Creed is just the first Rocky with this roles inverted. I mean,
it's. I don't think, because if you look at Rogue One as a Star Wars equivalent, being sort of a branch off in a way, it's not. It's part of the storyline, and this is a separate story arc altogether. I don't think this is part of Rocky.
So
this
we're
is
sticking to the 6 Rocky movies.
Yes, that's my
which
opinion.
I've seen 3.
But we won't.
I saw Rocky Balboa on a plane.
Let's decide to do one that we've all seen. Maybe Back to the Future next, but that's too easy to rank. Maybe Batman's. I have to do some homework on that though.
I mean, listen. I think we need to do Batman, and I think we need to do Rocky. I think that much is clear. We also probably need to do Star Wars.
Maybe Star Wars is the next one that we do.
Yes, let's piss off the internet.
Yeah, I say Star Wars because we've seen
the best Star Wars movie of all.
We've seen them all, but maybe we spend a couple weeks and we decide when we're going to record again. But anyway, to everybody who's tuned in and watched and stuck with us because you're used to maybe us doing true crime. Yes, we're probably rebranding a bit just because, well, it's our channel. We want to do what we want, and it's all about hanging out. But if you do like this kind of stuff, we're probably going to be edging more towards reviews moving forward. And we'll see where this goes. But anyway, Dixon, had a great time on this one. Thanks for jumping in. I think
the next episode should be us reviewing the fact that you put Temple of Doom, or excuse me,
Last Crusade
ahead of Temple of Doom. That's a crime. That's a true crime. You did it.
I'm not worried because the audience is going to be more concerned about your rosy tinted glasses with Crystal Skull.
Well, I'm going to tell you, actually, the problem is that your list was entirely defensible. I mean, I know most people would probably put Raiders and Last Crusade 1, 2 in some order. I know I'm idiosyncratic with Temple of Doom being second, but I especially in this age of over reliance on nostalgia, I find I become more and more admiring of films that do not over rely on it. And as such, probably if you'd asked me 10 years ago, Last Crusade certainly would have been number 2. But I just, the more you see everything being driven by nostalgia for something else, the more it becomes originality in some form has to be recognized. So
I think that's a point we'll have to pick up, because I think that that's just a construct of where Temple of Doom was versus where Last Crusade was. It's farther removed from the genesis of the franchise, whereas Temple of Doom is right in the middle of. It was a prequel, so there isn't going to be nostalgia. I don't think that there's an argument to be made about, oh, it's good that Temple of Doom didn't fall back to nostalgia. It was a prequel. Where are they going to do that?
Admittedly, the temptation for being nostalgic for Temple of Doom wouldn't have existed because it's only the second film.
Yes.
But in general, I mean, like one of the things they tell you about movie trailers, why are movie trailers so long and why do they show you most of the plot? Well, you do audience research on this. It's because audiences don't like surprises. They like going in and being, they've paid their money. They know what they want to see. So they don't want to come in and see, something that really deviates very far from expectations, which is why these rehashes are so commonplace, why sequels are so popular, obviously, and remakes. You're cashing in on known properties, and the more expensive movies become, the truer that will be. But anyway, I do think that Temple of Doom maybe wasn't in a position to be nostalgic yet, granted, but at the same time, it certainly was in the position, like they didn't have to make a prequel. They could have made a sequel where Indiana, like they could have done The Last Crusade next. There's nothing would have prevented them from saying, okay, what naturally comes after the Holy Grail? What actually comes after the Ark of the Covenant? The Holy Grail, or something to do with Jesus. Well,
I think we from here, I think it'll be interesting to see where our own podcast story arcs go between these films and our takes on nostalgia moving forward. When we start talking about Star Wars, it will come up 100%. But anyway, this might be a good time to wrap. Dixon, as always, thank you. I really enjoyed that. To anybody else, if you are watching still, like and subscribe, and let us know how you judge our ranking, which I'm sure you will. But where do you see the rank? Where do you see Indiana Jones? What is the best? What is the worst? And to everybody else, thanks so much, and we'll catch up with you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, bye, everyone. Bye.